All right, this is going to be just a full video talking about Preemptive, how it works, what we can do with all the information, and how we should scan in strongholds. There's a lot of nuance when it comes to Preemptive. I've thought for many days, honestly a week at this point, on how to make this video and what information to give. I think I'm going to give a more intermediate guide. So if you know all the fundamentals, this should be everything you need. It'll give you all the information that you need. I'll give you what I think is the best way to scan. And yeah. All right, so just to recover some really basics, we scan an 8RD 50 ND distance on this Llama practice map, which I'll link. This is good for getting your spikes. We use 150, so we can always have the cows loaded. But in real runs, we always use 50. So make sure you're always setting to that in the stronghold. It works like 99% of the time with these settings, and it just makes it gives you less junk rendered, basically. The information we get from scans with our pie chart, on this pie, of course, game render level entities, the information we get is that a chunk that has a specific thing in it is rendered on our screen somewhere. This is why you don't need to look necessarily at the spawner. You can look at this corner and I'd still get the spike because this chunk that it's in is loaded. Traditionally, there's been two ways that you you get readings. The first is just what's known as a pure reading. You have hitboxes off, you don't hover any blocks. This has its advantages and disadvantages, but a lot of people default to this. They kind of dance around the stronghold, spinning in a circle, so you can scan every way using this. The other way is using hitboxes and hovering blocks. Hovering blocks basically causes your unspecified to decrease, and hitboxes just allows you to get more spikes than usual. It also gives you some extra information, but I'll cover that later. I'm going to talk a bit later about their advantages and disadvantages and what I think is the best. But if you really want to be a master preemptive, you should know both of your spikes, both of your sets of spikes, you could say. Know what you're looking for, both hovering and not hovering. Both hovering and not hovering. Obviously, you can choose to do one, and I'll say which one you should do later, but you don't have to. All right, the first thing that affects your spike is chest orientation. So while we're looking for a silverfish spawner, another thing that affects your pie chart is the presence of chests. Chests are extremely common in strongholds. Most of your spikes are going to be a spike with a chest rendered, but I'm going to talk about them a little bit. This first spike is known as Big Orange. Regardless of which one which scanning method you use, hover, hitbox, or regular, it looks about the same. This spike occurs when there is any amount of chest that is further than the spawner. This chest will affect the spike a lot more than any in the front. Just having even a single one in the back will always lead to the spike, regardless of how many are in front. So this is the most common to look out for. This is notable because even without having hitboxes on, when you hover blocks, you still get a spike here. You'll see that it's pretty similar to my other values that I'll show you later. So that's one advantage of it. The second spike, and you can, again, if on Llama's map, you can do the exact same thing I'm doing to get the same spikes. The second one is a chest in front of it without chest behind. This is known as the average reading. With pure readings, it looks something like this. You might recognize it. It's the second most common. You'll notice when I hover blocks, the spike kind of goes away. It's down at this 46%. It's not super obvious on my hardware, but when I use hitboxes, it goes above 50%. So this is a big reason why we use hitboxes when we're hovering, is that we can now get the spike. The final spike in the middle is when you don't have any chest rendered. This is known as the pure spike. It's the hardest to recognize and also the rarest. I'd say for every 6 strongholds with one of these two spikes, you get one of these. But it is still very, it's common enough that you need to know how to deal with it. This is previously the biggest weakness of scanning with hitboxes on, is that the spike right here, this 45, when you're hovering with hitboxes, it's about the same as having, let's say, only 4 chests rendered. Oops, I'm on French. But if I just put a bunch of chests in front of me, I have nothing rendered. I put 4, maybe 5. Oh, I'm not hovering, that's why. It could be more, but you'll notice that it's getting awfully similar. Yeah, 6 chests, it's really similar. So a couple libraries and altar chests, this spike becomes really similar to something that you can get that's fake. But it is to be noted that that spike isn't that common. But when you get the spike, how you can differentiate it is by toggling hitboxes. you'll see it immediately. My block entities changes a lot when I turn them off. It goes down to about half of what it was before. And this is really helpful because when you toggle hitboxes with a chest spike, it doesn't change at all. So if you don't have any spike in starter and you're doing a hover, a really good way to bypass that is just turn off hitboxes. If it changes, you know you have a silverfish spawner. And this is one of the realest confirmations you can get. And I'll talk about it a bit more later, but this is like really good. The next thing that affects your spike is the presence of entities. This can be a few different things. It can be like a physical mob. It can be a minecart chest. It can be an item on the ground that's rendered. All of those pretty much hide any of those spikes you get, regardless of what scanning method you use. It was believed before that you could get some consistent spikes, but it seems like it's not really doable anymore. I think that most people have come to that consensus. So the way to go around spikes is by scanning more precisely. Normally we use 30 FOV. Let's say there's an entity here. It's just going to prevent it. But if I were to go thin and not have it loaded, I can still get the spike and bypass this. That's because entities are different than block entities. Block entities, we get this spike no matter what part of the chunk we have rendered because it's tied to the chunk, while entities, if this entity itself isn't rendered on your screen, it won't affect your spike. So pretty simple fix. It can be kind of annoying sometimes. It happens a lot more than you'd think, especially on like dig downs, but there are ways to kind of bypass it. The second case is spawners. So there's 4 different types of spawners that can spawn. We have cave spider, spider, zombie, and skeleton. The 3 on the right all happen in dungeons. So when we're getting these spikes, we want to always have chests rendered because there's basically no scenario in which you get these spikes without chests. It would be very, very rare because it means there's no chests in the stronghold towards it, and both chests in the dungeon were corrupted, which I don't think happens very often. In both of these cases, skeleton and spider, they're really easy to tell they're fake. Using both methods, they're just nothing that you get in normal spikes. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by a normal spike afterwards. But both of these, they're just not something you can get from silverfish spawner spikes. The one that's kind of universally horrible is a zombie spawner. That's because this is the exact same value as silverfish, so it has the same spikes. Meaning this spike I get right here is going to be the exact same as a silverfish, 2 chests in front of it, and that just kind of sucks. But there's not too many ways around that. We know that there's always 2 chests towards a zombie spawner, so to me, if I had 2 real spikes, I'd go to the lower one, because I think a silverfish spawner is more likely to have less chests. But there's probably not too much nuance to it. Now, the last case is a cave spider spawner. This is the furthest left of the mob spawners. When we have a chest, again, it's really apparent that it's fake. Not much issue there. The problem with cave spider spawners is that since these don't spawn in dungeons, it's a pretty common occurrence that you don't get any that there aren't any chests rendered. And when that happens, this spike, you can probably differentiate it from unspecified compared to this one. But when you do hover hitbox, this is a very real spike that I get. It's pretty similar to the big orange spike I have over there. Now, we did recently find a fix for this, which kind of solves the problem if you know what you're looking for. But you'll notice this spike is 57. When I toggle hitboxes off, it goes down to like 49. But if I were to go over to like this, and I replicated that 57, put a few more chests, make one more. It's more common when you have one behind it because it basically is like adding 3 chests in front. But when we have that similar spike, and I turn off hitboxes, it goes down significantly less. This goes to 52, while this goes to 49. It usually goes below 50 if you're on my specs. But again, it's good to know what your numbers go to. But this is good because it gives us a method to differentiate the pure cave spider spawners, which previously was a pretty big issue. Shout out Silver for that, by the way. The final pretty common occurrence that prevents you from getting a spike is when you have chunk culling. Long story short, I'll make a full video on it. It's when there's a lack of air between you and the portal room, which basically means the portal room doesn't render, which means you can't get a spike. All you really need to know as someone doing preemptive is that the way to change how the portal room is rendered is to cross chunk borders. So in this case, I can cross this chunk border and now I can get a spike. I can cross this chunk border and get a spike. An important piece of nuance is that the most common occurrences of chunk culling is along a secret room. So if you don't have a spike from starter, no matter what you do, and you turn on chunk borders and you see that there's a secret room that aligns, this would be the first border you cross. You can just break this open, cross the chunk border, and then you can rescan. Let's see, I'm getting the spike now. There's a bit more nuance to it. Again, I'm going to make a full video talking about it if you're interested. But all you really need to know is that if you can't get a spike from starter, it's a good idea to start crossing chunk borders. Now let's just putting it all together. So I think if you had to choose one to learn, I would recommend using hover hitbox. The big reasons being that for each different spike, there's only one value to know, which makes it really easy on your brain for remembering. But at the same time, for those those weaknesses we're talking about, where it could be other spikes, we can utilize turning off hitboxes. We can utilize that to differentiate the spikes. Now, realistically, top runners should probably know both. Mainly because there are going to be cases where maybe your stronghold, your portal doesn't snap, so you can't use the portal frame, or maybe you just don't want a really hard force looking down at the ground so you can get any higher spikes. But in general, I think that it's good to know both. If you want to have the highest success rate, you should know all of your spikes the best you can. But as I see it, if you were only to learn one, I think you can do everything you can while hovering blocks, and it's also going to be just faster in a lot of cases. I made a couple different videos just talking about how I think you should do it. I both have a video talking specifically about hover hitbox and a 40-minute video of me using it and it's kind of walking through. Those are great utilities. But if you want, I did do a study of 100 strongholds and just finding what obscured the spike or what happened most. 65% of strongholds, or 13 out of 20, they gave a pretty clear spike using 30 FOV and thin. 10%, they gave a pure spike, which used to be a bigger issue, but now that we have hitbox wiggle, this can be added to that 65% to be 75% that we can get from the easily from the portal animation. 9% had entities that made it really hard to get the spike. Obviously, it can't prevent it, but it just makes it more difficult. 10% had some sort of chunk culling. That meant you had to change what chunk you were in to get a spike. 3% had fake spawners that also had the real spawner behind chunk culling. So really rare situation. 10% just had some amount of other spawners. And then 2% required crossing 2 or more chunk borders because it was just that bad. So what it seems like is that if you follow all the steps correctly, even accounting for chunk culling, about 95%, if you know all of your stuff, you should be able to get a spike within one chunk from starter. Maybe 85 you can get without even leaving the portal animation, which is pretty promising. But again, really good to rescan on the way to spikes. Rescanning gives you a lot more information. It gives you updated angles. Also, don't forget how nav works. If you only have one direction in your stronghold, you don't have to really force starter, so it may be good to just pay quick attention to your other rooms if you don't instantly get a spike. But yeah, I hope you can use this the best you can. I also made a really comprehensive preemptive tutorial that I ended up scrapping the video idea for it, but if you want to see the script for that, I'll link that in the description as well. Again, I'm gonna link the script. I'll link my the chunk culling video when it's done, and yeah, if you know all this information, you can figure out every stronghold eventually yourself. You can decide for yourself what you think is the fastest, but what's important is that you know how everything works. You know fundamentally what your spikes can be and what they can't be. You know your ways to differentiate fake-looking spikes, and you know what can cause spikes to not appear. Hopefully this helps. If someone ends up making a really comprehensive, maybe more beginner-friendly tutorial, I'll also link it in the description. But yeah, hopefully this helps out some people.